Thanks for joining, Jon. Appreciate it. So just as a kind of as an introduction, then you are a futurist, and you're also the editor of Cherryflava, which has been going on for close to 17 years now, right?
2004. Yeah, it's been a long journey with the website, but yeah, it's been great. So yeah, since 2004, 16 years, 17 years this year.
Awesome. And so cherryflava.co.za provides your...
Actually, .com.
.com. Sorry about that. Okay. Cherryflava.com.
No, we're international. We don't
Yes. Yeah. No, we need to be. Yeah.
Cater to South Africans.
And it provides your unique flavor on sort of your, what you see as emerging trends, strategy, innovation around what companies and global brands are doing and how they're thinking as well. And that's kind of what plays into your strengths, right, as a futurist, because it's all around that long-term thinking. So what is a futurist? How would you define what you do?
Yeah, look, a futurist is someone who is a professional practitioner. So it is a profession. You can actually study to be a futurist. In the United States, you study a degree called foresight. My degrees that I did a postgraduate, and then I did a master's degree in something called futures studies. So the basic idea is that, like anything, you can study the future. And a futurist is someone who spends an awful lot of time thinking about the future and actually gathering knowledge about the future. And you might say to yourself, well, how is it possible that you can gather knowledge from a place that or a time that hasn't happened as yet? Well, as an example of that, if you want to know what the weather is going to be like in a couple of days, you'll ask a meteorologist. And a meteorologist basically looks at weather patterns, and they look at changes in weather patterns. And they take all of that data and they put it into some very, very powerful computers, and they analyze those patterns, and the computer will then give a forecast of what the weather will be like in the next couple of days. Obviously, the longer you want to forecast out. So as the time horizon increases, the less accurate that forecast is going to be. So a futurist does something quite similar, but instead of studying weather patterns, a futurist will study changes in the way that societies behave. They'll look at changes in economics. They'll look at changes in politics. In the social dimension, they'll look at changes in culture. They'll just look at changes and try and find deviations in those patterns. And then the idea is to actually try and map that out into the future. So should a certain change happen, what will that look like in a year's time? And there's no ways that you can predict that accurately. So futurists or good futurists don't necessarily dabble in prediction. What they do is they offer you a set of scenarios as to how that future might unfold. So you've often seen that futurists talk about scenarios, and our intention is really to try and see what is possible, what is probable, and then what is preferable, because people would like that. They would like a future, I would assume, that is better than today. So that's what we try and do. The other side of future studies is the opposite of that. So instead of exploring what the future might hold, a futurist is also a practitioner which helps organizations or governments or companies to imagine or have a compelling vision of what the future could or should be. So you start off with that compelling vision, and then you work backwards from there as to how you can possibly create it. So in that way, you are exploring the mechanisms of how you can create it, but you could also potentially be looking at the different ways of thinking which are required in order to eliminate some of the barriers that people might have in their mental state in order to achieve that better future. So hopefully I've explained the two sides of future studies and what a futurist actually does.
That's awesome. It's actually a lot clearer in my mind now that you've given that sort of great, I suppose, almost the difference that you needed to paint between somebody who dabbles in predictions or makes, wild claims about the future because no one really has that crystal ball, versus somebody who provides something that might be more probable or a little bit more possible, in the realm of possibility, and then can prescribe certain recommendations or certain ways of how to then handle or how to mitigate something or how to possibly to avoid it a little bit better, rather than just blindly going into tomorrow and not really knowing what might happen.
So it is about spotting opportunities as well as risks. So if you can spot an opportunity or a risk early enough, then you can start putting plans in place today to either go and get that opportunity or to avoid the risk. The reason that futurists are not very keen on prediction is that prediction gives you one future. And what happens is that you become rigidly locked into that one future. And as we know, anything can disrupt the path that you would assume everybody is on. I think this time last year, there were very few people in the world that would have predicted that a global epidemic would have disrupted the entire world's operation for 2020. So that's an example of how prediction is very dangerous. And futurists are really good at looking at alternative views of what the future might be, because it creates the understanding, or it entrenches the understanding that the future is uncertain. And because it's uncertain, we have to think very carefully about all the different futures that might play out, and not necessarily have action plans for each one, but at least to have done the mental arithmetic or mental exercises, what you might do should a certain future actually manifest. That's what it's about. It's about creating that kind of futures consciousness so that you're more resilient and more prepared for futures that you didn't necessarily expect.
I love that, especially when you mention, futures consciousness. I suppose then it also sort of implies that being a futurist, or at least being proficient in future studies in the sense you just described, is something that a machine couldn't do. So essentially, you might have, really, really bold predictions on data and sophisticated algorithms that, will predict behavior and so on. But is there still essentially a kind of a human element or a human touch to being a futurist, to being successful at trying to anticipate what a future might look like, would you say?
Yeah, it's such a great point, because data is inherently gathered from history. You can only gather fact from time that has already passed. So if you have to now take that data and extrapolate it into an uncertain future, that data is going to have limitations. And that's what a machine essentially does. A machine will look at facts, which have a past focus, and they will extrapolate information from those facts. But what you're saying is that human beings are creative. Machines are not necessarily creative. And great futures imagine quite wildly different scenarios. And futurists call them wild cards. And I'm sure you've heard of Talib's book, where he wrote about the black swan, which specifically he was talking about the 2008 financial crisis, which again, nobody necessarily saw in the data, but creatively you could potentially imagine that the black swan event, which was the 2008 financial crisis, might play out. And that's where future studies gets quite interesting, is when you start thinking quite creatively about what the future might hold. And that's inherently a human ability, and only human beings can be creative in that way. And that's, I think, where things get quite interesting. And in many respects, the futurists, there are academic futurists that do a lot of research, and more they're actually looking at science fiction and the value of science fiction to unlock the imagination as to what the future might hold. And sometimes you can look at somebody like an Elon Musk and think like, wow, this guy comes straight out of science fiction. His ideas are so radical. Who would have thought that an entrepreneur would have the audacious vision of sending a spaceship to Mars? That's just crazy. But that is Elon Musk's imagination. It's
Yeah.
his ability to imagine such a crazy, audacious vision.
Yeah.
And a machine would struggle to do something like that. So it's not that machines are not useful. They're absolutely useful in crunching information and data and looking at certain patterns. But I think a lot of future studies is about imagination and using creativity to imagine what if.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I suppose, yeah, even the greatest futurists or machines probably couldn't have predicted Pretoria's homeboy and rising to the status he's risen to right now, richest man in the world. But it's not undeserved. I think he's doing some incredible things.
No, he is. Look, I think you'd either love him or hate him. I think he's quite an arrogant guy, but I think you have to be arrogant in order to achieve such success. I think a lot of people made a lot of money on owning Tesla shares, so they're obviously huge fans of Elon Musk. Yeah, look, I think you need people like Elon Musk to really push the boundaries of what is possible. And I think, to his credit, he's shown that a private company can explore space travel successfully, commercial space travel. So he's really showing up that, showing the world that you can disrupt industries that are really entrenched and be successful at it. And I think because of that, you've really got to, tip your hat to the guy and say, this is just absolutely fabulous. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, what's amazing is that he was able to do that in more than one industry. So, you might get a one-trick pony, where there might be, a couple examples of very talented people, but they've made an impact only within their particular space. But he did that with PayPal, he did that with SpaceX, he's doing it with Tesla. So there's something very interesting about perhaps his character or the way he sees the world. It doesn't really matter what industry or what's in front of him. There's a kind of a tool set. And I mean, obviously many people are like that too. But it's an interesting, for me also, like there's something there around your discipline, which is around future studies and the kind of the growing influence of technology, right? Almost to the point where I'd imagine, a lot of sort of futurists are almost constantly looking at technology to drive that momentum into the future, right? To what degree do you think that's true, or are there other forces that are still at play?
Look, I think technology does drive a lot of change. So if you're looking for what we call faint signals of change that you might spot on the horizon, in many ways it is driven by that change in technology. But the interesting side of analyzing the future is looking at what people do. So people are very strange. They're very strange animals. And as we know, like there's more and more research in behavioral economics or just general behavior as to, what sparks somebody to do what they do. What sparked those people in the United States to go and storm the Capitol building in Washington, D.C.? What on earth sparked that? Now, if you were watching people very closely and you were finding information from the right sources, you probably would have been able to forecast that event happening at some point. Because of the anger, because of the disempowerment of many, many groups, because of the misinformation which is being widely spread thanks to technology. So again, technology leads it. The internet leads it. But the interesting thing is, what do people do with that information? What do they do with that technology? Twitter was founded, 10 years ago, maybe longer, 15 years ago. Now you're giving people a voice. You're giving people the ability to communicate in what was 140 characters. And anyone can open a Twitter account. So you might get a scientist who's sharing great information and great knowledge, or you might get a psychopath or a lunatic doing the same thing and convincing millions and millions of people of facts which are not necessarily true. Now, a futurist will look at that as a change and go, what might unfold into the future as a result of this? What might the people do as a result? That's where things get super interesting. That's where you start seeing this great change, and you can start mapping and doing forecasts as to what might play out. obviously there's always multiple, there are multiple paths, there are multiple realities that might be created, but it's always interesting just to think about those.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I suppose many of us, are what you might call amateur futurists, where we all have an interest in the future. We all have a vested interest in certain things coming to pass, or not.
It's where we're going to spend the rest of our lives. So it's advisable that you think about it quite a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I'm curious to kind of follow up on what you said about Twitter and the overall theme of sort of digital interactions and what they're going to be like in the future. I suppose, sitting, in front of Jack Dorsey and the others and some of the other platforms that maybe were starting out 10, 15 years ago, they probably could never have imagined the size and the importance that these sorts of platforms nowadays play. Maybe it started out with really good intentions to connect people, to form community where community didn't exist, and certainly leveraging the power of the internet to do that. But at the same time, there have been certain things that have kind of run amok. So what would you say the kind of the future of digital interactions will be like? Where is it going, and how will it impact us, for sort of decades to come, I suppose, if that's even possible?
Yeah, I think that's a really key question, because what has happened is that technology, because it has been advancing at such an exponential rate, regulators of technology have not necessarily had the tools to control the technology. They haven't necessarily had the policies to just make sure that society isn't necessarily harmed. And I think more and more, there's a lot of debate around privacy. There's a lot of debate around should there not be more regulation? Should these big tech companies not be broken up? Because as we know, if you have a technology which is as powerful as a Facebook or an Instagram or a Twitter, you've got some of the brightest minds on the planet working for these companies. And you've also got machines, which are some of the world's most powerful machines, feeding you information which is designed to be addictive. So now you, Alex Searles, sitting in Spain, are scrolling through your Instagram feed. There's a machine, probably the most powerful machine on the planet, with the most advanced algorithms, feeding you information which they know is going to make you just keep on scrolling. Every time you scroll, the longer you stay on the platform, the more money Facebook makes. The more money goes into,
and the more it learns about you as well.
The more it learns about you. So let's extrapolate that into the future. Let's say Jeff Bezos, he's running one of the biggest, most successful, most powerful, most highly valued companies in the world. More and more people are using Amazon every single day. They're learning about your shopping habits. They know when you shop. They know how you shop. They know how you browse. And more, that machine is just monopolizing the retail market in the United States. The result of that is that you do get monopolies in those areas. And because there's no real regulation, especially in the United States, to try and control that, you've got inequality. You've got the fact that an Amazon literally is putting thousands and thousands of even bigger businesses out of business because they're just more efficient. So it's the same with digital media. The more people use these platforms, the more powerful they get. So if you were looking at a dystopian future, you would say, well, let's say, for instance, Instagram merges with Amazon. Now you've got the world's most compelling social media platform linked with the world's biggest buying, biggest selling platform. What is the result of that? The result is that you have one company in the entire planet that runs retail for the entire planet. And not just retail for groceries and tangible things, retail for content, retail for films, for movies, everything. So what happens is that because they have unlimited power, they can also put a significant amount of their own opinion, their own bias into the products that they produce. It's just not, it's not a great situation because there isn't diversity. You need diversity, as we've now learned from this pandemic. You need some kind of diversity just to make sure that the world is more resilient, that there's fair competition, that people are not necessarily exploited. So in many ways, because there isn't that regulation, and because these platforms and these companies are private and they're trying to produce private profits from people, I think there's a real temptation to try and make sure that they deliver and maximize on those profits, not necessarily maximize on the public utility of the platform itself. So that's a very long answer to your question, but I think
it answers the question for sure. And I mean, also when you mention Amazon and I, you know, Amazon is so incredibly successful at what it does. And it seems that, you know, in some sense, the more successful, the bigger something becomes, the more the list of haters, you know, can grow, or the reasons to boycott. So looking at that, there's also been this movement, and I'm curious about your thoughts on this, of what you can call kind or conscious capitalism, right? Where there's the sense in kind of putting the customer first, and Amazon are certainly all about that, at least in their marketing messages, you know, but at the same time, you know, where there's a capitalism that embraces kindness and connection and community and kind of giving back, and not so much on profit and bottom lines. What do you make of that? Is that just sort of more marketing fluff, or is there some real intention behind it?
It's PR. It's all PR. Because look, what is a business? A business, at the end of the day, the way that it is structured today, within the system of capitalism that the world follows, a business's primary intention is to produce a profit. How a business does that, sure, you need to be lawful. Many businesses are starting to say, well, we need to do it ethically as well, as long as we tick the box that people approve of. But at the end of the day, if you are a business and your intention is to produce profit for your stakeholders, for your shareholders, however you define those shareholders, that's your intention. Your intention is not necessarily to be a good Samaritan. Your intention is not necessarily to save the world. And you know, the thing is, Alex, that a lot of these big tech companies, so even if Amazon does say that they care about you and they want to make sure that they don't necessarily tread over any lines that hurt society, the fact is a lot of these businesses, they, within the boundaries of the law, they will funnel a lot of their profits into things like tax havens, or they will try and reduce their tax burden. And the issue with that, as we know, is that when money goes into a tax haven, it doesn't necessarily go into the public coffers. The reason that we have this pandemic, which is going around the world and disrupting economies and putting people out of jobs, is because it's a failure of the public health system, a public health system which is funded through tax revenues. And if companies are choosing to, instead of paying their due tax, but they would rather put it into a tax haven so they avoid the tax liability, that is stealing from the public good. And as we've now seen, there are consequences to that kind of behavior. So until such time as the system itself changes, in other words, the system itself outlaws tax havens, and that's going to require a lot of coordination of governments around the world in order to achieve that. So it's unlikely at this stage. But until that system changes, I think all of these things where people, you know, showed a group of diverse models on their Instagram feed and say, well, you know, we believe in diversity. It's nonsense. It's not true. And the facts show that. The fact is that wealth and income inequality is growing throughout the world. It is a major, major concern. Climate change is carrying on at a rate which is beyond what we can control. And climate change is that as a direct result of our current system of capitalism. So until the system changes, those things are not going to change, because people can, people's behavior is dictated as to how the system is. So yeah, it's PR. It's absolute nonsense.
So then the essentially conscious capitalism, or whatever, the other terms that might be applied to it, doesn't go far enough. It's just sort of another band-aid. It's farting against thunder, really.
At this stage, yeah. Look, I think what is important, and this is what's interesting from a futures point of view, is that consumers are starting to ask questions. Consumers are starting to say, but where does this thing come from? Who financed this operation? And a great example is a company, which is a Swedish company called Oatly. And Oatly make an oat milk, which apparently is very, very tasty. And
it is indeed, I have to say.
I haven't actually tried it. I'm an okay, yeah kind of guy. But Oatly has done very well in the United States. It's specifically designed to be used by baristas. So you can froth the thing and you can put it in your flat white. And for many, many years, Oatly built a fabulous brand. They have really done a fantastic job.
Yeah.
And then Oatly decided to take some financing from Blackstone. And Blackstone is a hedge fund. They obviously put money into many, many projects. But one of the projects that they do finance results in the deforestation of huge parts of the Amazon. And understandably, what you've got is that you've got people who have consciously chosen to support a brand because it is seen as more ethical to drink oat milk than dairy milk. So they've chosen that lifestyle. And now you find out that the people who run Oatly are actually taking money from, people who also fund massive destruction of the planet. That just cannot be. So I find that story encouraging, because what it shows is that people are more aware. People are taking responsibility. And for those people, it's not just about PR. It is that they do understand the causal nature of economics. They do understand the causal nature of how the system works. And they're saying no. And at the moment, I think it's a niche. I think in Europe, the veganism trend is quite big. It's growing down here in Cape Town as well. I still think there's a lot of cool people that choose veganism because it is trendy. But I think as we explore more and as we know more, the tide will change slowly.
Right.
And hopefully, after many, many decades, the entire system of capitalism is rethought. And thankfully, there is more and more theory as to what alternatives might look like. And I guess what irritates me is that people say, oh, well, if you're against capitalism, then you're a socialist, which is not true at all.
It's a little outdated, that, isn't it?
Yeah, because there aren't just two choices.
It's not binary
you don't just
anymore.
get pure capitalism and pure socialism and you must now decide.
Yeah.
There are models which are hybrids of both, which you can still run a business, but a business that actually makes the world a better place, not just generates profit. It has the ability to really improve people's lives. It has the ability to make the planet a better place.
So I mean, what does that look like then? Because in a sense, what you've just said is that left to their own devices, businesses and brands, however big or small they might be, are ultimately still going to be a slave to the profit motive. Just look at Oatly. And if anything, where was their conscience, so to speak? I mean, I don't want to, go down on Oatly too much, but the point is, I think that you were making is that it's actually up to consumers and educated audiences to be able to not only hold them to account, but perhaps themselves being the ones taking the lead in pointing out these alternatives and forcing the companies or the services that they use to change their ways. So what could those ways credibly be, do you think?
Look, I think it is about having an awareness of how things are made and how the system works. The world around us that we see today, the amazing technology, the cities that we live in, the population that the planet houses right now is as a direct result of the kind of capitalism that we've enjoyed up until this time. Right. So I'm a trained economist as well. So I'm not for 1 minute going to point fingers at capitalism and say, wow, this is a major problem. I've also benefited from it. We all have. We are all part of the system. Yeah. I think what we realized is that in a closed system, which is the planet, you cannot have this unhinged growth that just grows and grows and grows in the same way that we've kind of defined it up until now. So I think at some point it has to change. It's got to tip over. And I think, there's so many signals right now that we're on the brink of a new way of thinking about business. And I think the first step is just, I suppose, educating yourself as to what the alternatives might be. What does donut economics look like? Which is a woman by the name of Kate Raworth. She wrote a book called Donut Economics, which is a viable alternative to present neoliberal capitalism. And
a donut in the sense of kind of circular and nothing wasted, nobody left out in that sense.
Right. And also there is limits. So you cannot just keep on producing something. There is a limit to it. And you've got to balance that production with looking at how you can, contribute towards society. And certain cities around the world are starting to experiment with it. And I think that's the other side of it, is that I don't think any business can just transition tomorrow and say, well, now we're going to be a green business. I think what you can do is start experimenting with innovation in the space. So how might you just reduce certain aspects of your carbon footprint? Right. How might you go about actually starting to educate your customers that you're not perfect, but you're on a journey to improve? And this is how you're going to improve, and this is how you are planning to just be better in the space. And there's a lot of evidence that those kind of companies actually do quite well financially as well. So without actually focusing on the financial incentive as much, they seem to be just more resilient. They seem to be more sustainable. Because, as you say, once people find out that you're on a journey to be a sustainable, people-friendly, earth-friendly, conscious business, well, people want to support that kind of business. They find the way that they do business quite pleasing. Yeah. Because I think more and more we're looking at the CEO who's driving his Jaguar and going along, well, that's not right. What have you done to earn those millions of dollars that the company gives you? So, I think it is about having an awareness, and I guess about taking the responsibility and the commitment to not transitioning immediately, but just to explore what is possible every single day.
It's so much that you've said there that I want to unpick, but I suppose, because I love it and I agree with everything you say, and certainly there are many examples where you can see some of that happening, or at least they're little kernels of those sorts of changes happening, whether it's an individual in an organization trying to do something differently, or whether it's a conscious consumer trying to buy differently. I suppose then it almost goes down to what happens on a micro scale, on an everyday individual level, where somebody just decides, okay, well, I'm not going to go and, buy that sort of, chemical-based product anymore. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to pay for this subscription because I know these profits go to something that I could not ever support. And so then there's something then that almost needs to take place on an individual level where there's a quote by a guy called, I think his name is Greg McKeown, and he speaks about this undisciplined, where we need to shift away from this undisciplined pursuit of more, and then sort of shift across to something where there's a disciplined pursuit of less but better. Maybe you've heard of something like that, but paraphrased, maybe not getting it right completely, but it almost seems like there needs to be an individual shift, whether it's a consumer, whether it's a CEO, whoever else, and then that kind of momentum comes. You can't sort of expect the momentum to come first, and then everyone is sort of, slowly pushed into the promised land.
And also, let's not lie to ourselves. That shift is incredibly difficult because
Exactly.
just like we were talking about the addictive nature of a social media platform like Instagram, big companies have created such convenience that it is very, very difficult to look for alternatives in the face of that convenience. So, as an example, I think the lockdown has been quite interesting because more and more people have done something as simple as starting to try to bake bread. Now, the
Yeah.
process of growing your own little sourdough animal and growing that and baking bread, it takes a long time. It takes up your whole day. People regard it as a hobby, but there are other benefits to it. You spend time with your family. It is like the artisanal process of seeing the bread rise and knowing
Yeah.
that this, through the labor of your own hands, you've created this fantastic loaf
Yeah.
of bread, which is great. But it just, you can't compare that to going to a store or going to an app and just ordering a loaf of bread from a store, which has got the ability to deliver that to you instantly. So I think it is exactly as you say, people having a consciousness of it, but also a firm commitment that actually it's better. It might take longer to bake that bread, and I don't need bread every single day, but I'm going to do it because actually it adds quality to my life. I'm not just a consumer, I'm actually someone who's experiencing life. And I think that's the value of these things is that, yes, life is going to be a little bit harder, but it's also like going to be quite cool. It's kind of like Bear Grilling's your life, you're gonna bake bread, and I'm gonna go and fish for my dinner.
I love it. Yeah.
It's kind of like you saying, I choose to have a life which is filled with a little bit more adventure than just being another consumer standing in a queue, like waiting for my little morsel of convenience.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think in many ways, people kind of want that. They want to experience what that's like. I think we're a little bit sick and tired of being a number, just being another a dollar bill for a big company. You've got dreams, damn it. You want to do stuff with your life. You want to experience how hard life might be. And I think that's what people are yearning for. They are maybe just wanting to check out a little bit from this rat race that we've built for ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a little, yeah, we could all do with a little more Bear Grylls, I think, in our lives. And yeah. Yeah.
It's totally rock star. It's, rock stars knit their own clothes, damn it. I mean, I want to go and dig my own pool.
Although I can't really picture Keith Richards with those sort of like oak tree hands knitting his own, jersey.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
Well, Keith Richards is definitely not going to go and stand in a queue at bloody Whole Foods. That's for sure.
No. I don't think he can even stand. Yeah. But no, let's not beat up on poor old Keith. Okay. Well, final sort of question to you, and maybe this is something that you probably get asked a lot, but any exciting sort of, or reasons for excitement, anything that might be coming, whether it's in the next year, in the next couple months, maybe 10 years away, but something that you are excited about getting out of bed for in the morning? Is there something that you are looking forward to? Is there something that you're just jumping up and down inside about?
Jeez, Alex, like pick one. I think there's so much happening right now, and I think a lot of people are framing it as disaster. I think we're on the cusp of something brand new. Exactly as you say. I think people are starting to wake up. They're starting to realize that life doesn't have to be as formulaic as what we've made it. And I think what's so interesting is that every problem that you see around you is man-made. We've created these problems, and we can also fix them. But I think whenever I am feeling disheartened or whatever, I really just do look at younger people. So I'm not that young anymore. I'm almost 50 years old. But I look at younger people, and I look at their energy, and I look at their ideas, and I look at their enthusiasm. And I just think that that's where the future lies. There's a different kind of consciousness in the youth of today. And I really do think that some amazing questions are being asked. And that's what this pandemic has brought us. It's asked us the questions of, is democracy still serving us? Is capitalism still serving us? Is the social contract that we have still relevant? How do we fix it? What are the alternatives? And I think in many instances, people are starting to experiment with alternatives and they are tweaking the model. And I think that's what's so great, is that we are at a time where the future is there to be created. And I think what this pandemic has done is that it has destroyed industries. It has destroyed in many cases the infrastructure of society. But what that has allowed is for us to go and build something that is more relevant for the future. And it's forced us to ask these questions that, what is possible in the future? How should our economies be structured? How should the world work together? What are the best alternatives that we can choose from? And I think that cannot be wasted. And I don't think it is being wasted. And that's what I'm really excited about. I'm really excited about this new phase that we're going into. And I'm excited about the experiments that are going to happen. And I'm excited about the possibility for things just to be a little bit more open and for there just to be better access for everybody to make a contribution. So
maybe
I'm hugely optimistic.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that optimism is very infectious, and perhaps that's the true sort of benefit of speaking to a futurist like yourself, is not necessarily knowing what's to come, because I mean that's a fruitless exercise anyway, but just to maintain an overall positive outlook for whatever may come, and just being open to what the future presents.
Yeah, never underestimate the ability of humans to solve a problem. And
That's true.
I think that our creativity is really going to come out, and we're going to be just brilliant at solving this problem. I'm not saying that there isn't going to be quite a bit of pain, and that transition is going to be tough. But I really do believe in human creativity, something that machines cannot do, but humans certainly can.
Yeah. Awesome. Jon, it's been amazing to talk to you. Thank you so much for a really enlightening, really, really cool conversation, and hope to have another one with you really, really soon. Thanks for speaking on The Humble Pie.
Thanks, Alex. It was really fun. So thank you very much for inviting me and allowing me to share. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you so much.